Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am pleased to be joined by the author of a book called The First Punch, Scrufty's Guide to Life by Greg Vrecenak. He is out in Abu Dhabi these days. And from what I hear, he's no longer anticipating the birth of his son. His son has arrived. And this book is it's an anthology of different things from sport that can help us in life. So it's very inspirational. So if you're looking for a little pick-me-up today or something to get you through the week, this episode is certainly for you. So welcome, Greg, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Cameron. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. So why don't you start off by telling us what your book is about and what inspired you to write it?
Sure. So every year on my brother's birthdays, my father's birthday, my friends' birthdays, I do these social media posts on Facebook, and I write little stories about the things that I've experienced with them. This past year, I did that for my father. I wrote 5 lessons that I had learned from him. And as I was writing it, I said to myself, there's so many more lessons than the 5 that I'm writing right now. And when I finished with that post, I began writing 5 lessons, then 10 lessons. And it turned out to be 40 lessons that I can think of at the time that I had learned from my father over the course of a lifetime that really guided how I look at the world now, how I think now, and how I act now.
Well, that's a lot. That's a lot. What do you think? Give us a sample. What are some of the best? What's the top? What's the cream of lessons you learned
So,
along the way?
yeah. So my favorite one is there's no such thing as a 5-minute job. So growing up, my father was a teacher, but he also worked in his father's business. And they used to do pool tables and amusement video games in bars and arcades. And whenever I go to my father's house, he'll say to me, Greg, I have a 5-minute job for you. And at first it was okay, it's only a 5-minute job, no problem, it'll be easy. But inevitably, that 5-minute job involved a lot of heavy lifting, involved a lot of strange maneuvering. So now whenever we hear the term 5-minute job, we know there's no such thing. And one of the lessons in the book is there is no such thing as a 5-minute job. So whatever you need to do, it's going to take actually longer than you've planned, than you have allocated and planned to do it in. And it's been a source of comedy in my family for years now.
Yes, I definitely have suffered from that. Everything always seems to take so much longer than I think it will. I remember when I was writing my first book, I thought, oh yeah, I'll have it done in 2 years. I think from end to end, it actually took 10, but only 4 of those were serious. So yes, I always, imagine things don't take very long and they end up taking way longer. So I think that's a good idea to keep in mind.
You have me beat with 10 years. This took me 6 years to put together after all is said and done. By the time I first put pen to paper, and now I have this 6 years, Cameron.
Yeah, no, it is a big look. People don't realize how much of it. No, I when I first started writing this book, or when I first started writing Cast Iron, my first novel, it was a story someone told me when I was 19 years old, and I kind of wrote it down, and I wrote out 75 pages, and then I was in college and everything, so it just kind of sat and stayed with me, and then when I started working on it seriously in 2013, I started writing on it, and then it came out. I finished it in 2019, and it came out in January of 2020. So it
Wow.
was, yes, it was a whole journey. So these things always take way longer. So yeah, I think that's the whole idea of giving yourself the time and space to do things is a good idea. That's definitely a good idea. Here's one that this is funny. I want to hear more. Don't give pickles to trick-or-treaters.
Oh, wow. Okay. Again, one of my favorite ones. We grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. So it's a tough, gritty neighborhood, but you develop a lot of these close friendships, with the people who you live on the same street with. So it's an amazing experience to grow up there, and you meet a ton of characters, especially in the '80s and the '80s and '90s. And every year we would go trick or treating. So my father would take us with one of our neighbors. His name was Timmy. We called him Timmy Heineken. He was a retired Navy man with a penchant for Heinekens. So his son Frankie, my brother Jeff, and I would go trick-or-treating with my father and Timmy. All of the houses, they would give you a typical candy, your sweet treats, and everybody was really, really cool about it. We went into a diner one time in Bensonhurst, and some guy, thinking he was going to be funny, put a pickle in my brother Jeff's bag. So
Mm.
we went out of the diner and we said, Dad, somebody put a pickle in Jeff's bag. And my father wasn't having it. So he walked back into this diner full of people and he started saying, "Who's the tough guy who put the pickle in the bag? Who's the tough guy? I want to know." And it went silent. And he had asked me to wait outside, but being 8 or 9, whatever I was at the time, I wasn't going to wait outside. So I followed in and I waited by the door and I watched this scene unfold. And I'm thinking to myself, here's my father and Timmy. These are two guys, and there's a diner full of other men, and nobody's saying a word. And it taught me a lot, that lesson about what it means to be a tough guy and what it means to stand up for your family. And I didn't think something like that was going to stick with me for the next 30 years, but that really resonates in terms of how, no matter how challenging the situation or if you're outnumbered, you still have to do what's right. You still have to protect those close to you. So that really solidified the type of guy my father is in my mind, especially when nobody said anything. And then we walked out and there was this little feeling of retribution. And as an 8-year-old, I'm really proud of my father for seeing him as this tough guy. We always couldn't grow up thinking our fathers are these strong people, but that solidified it in my mind.
No, that's quite impressive. He sounds like such a neat person. You talk about him so glowingly. I wish he were here. Why don't we have him on
We can always,
podcast?
what, that my wife had suggested that he come on the show with us, and I was like, oh, maybe next time. But he really is, and anything that I write or anything that I tell you on your show doesn't even begin to do justice to the type of lessons that I've learned from him. And if you've seen him in the classroom as a teacher, or, on the field as a coach, you would really understand the reason why I'm glowing while I tell these stories.
Yeah. So did you play sports a lot as a child?
I attempted to. My brother is the athlete in the family, but I played basketball and I played baseball, and I was okay. But my father was always the coach. So he would coach us in baseball during the summer, and then he would coach us in basketball during the fall and winter. And again, another one of the stories, another one of the anecdotes I put in the book is that he would be there to coach, and other parents would complain that they want their son to play this position or get this amount of playing time. And my father always said, okay, if you want to do it that way, then you can come coach. Nobody ever had the time. Like my father was in an abundance of time. He made the time for that which was important to him. And again, it's another one of those lessons that guide my life. I talk about these principles. It's making the time for what's really important and what really matters to you. So growing up, I played sports, and a lot of the lessons in the book are from the sports arena. Not all of the lessons, but a lot of the lessons are.
Yeah, I find the crucible of sport is very important to people. I am the opposite. I never played sports growing up, couldn't. I have quite severe asthma, so the sports field was off limits to me from a very young age. Um, and but everybody, I mean, I've seen, there's dozens of books kind of based upon the crucible of sport, and it seems like everybody who comes out of major league athletics ends up going to be an inspirational public speaker and all this type of thing, and talking all this type of thing. What do you think about team sports and everything? What makes that so profound an experience for people?
I think it's the chemistry that you build on field with your teammates. So a lot of my memories from sports and a lot of the lessons that come out of that are not only from my father as a coach, but the relationship that I developed, both on the field and those translated into off the field relationships as well. So a lot of the guys who are still my friends now, they're the guys that I grew up playing sports with. There's this unspoken bond that when you go into any form of battle, I'm talking here as a microcosm of war. You go into battle, you spend 7 innings or 9 innings or 48 minutes on a basketball court. You develop this bond, you laugh, you experience pain, you experience loss, you experience winning, but you also learn to play your part. And I think that's a huge part for me is at points in my life, I have struggled with knowing what my part is. I try to do too much. I try to do it all. And as I've grown older, and again, reflecting on my father's lessons, I learned that I don't have to do everything. I can do my part, and that's good enough, and good enough is okay.
Yeah, there's oftentimes I find that there are sometimes comparisons to I spent most of my life working in the performing arts. Um and so sometimes I compare those things to music and theater, but it's not quite the same, I don't think. Um People that do athletics and all this type of thing, the bond is very different than the cast of a show or an orchestra. I played in this youth orchestra and eventually taught at this youth orchestra. And one of the problems we had when I was there was the front half, the string section. Those kids were about 3 to 4 years younger than those of us who played woodwinds in the back. So we never associated with them. Like, we're sitting in the back, we're doing homework, we're talking, we're chatting. They're in middle school. We want nothing to do with them. Like, but this, because the skill sets are so different. You can become a decently skilled string player much faster than you can become a decent brass or woodwind player. It just takes longer, different pathway. And that sports team is so different, because you're closer in age, usually. Um, and you are all kind of working together towards a common goal. But then things, when you say, learning how to play your part and all that type of thing, that is, of course, an orchestra without organization quickly becomes noise.
That's it. Have you ever missed a note while you were playing?
Oh, 10,000 times. And I was a gigging musician for a long time, and I did solo stuff with that orchestra. Oh my, yes. How, if we could turn them into dollars, we'd both be rich, I'm sure.
Exactly. And when you missed that note or those series of notes, how did the people in the orchestra react to you? Did they get on your case? Did they pick you up? Did they tell you get it next time, or this is what you did wrong? How do they react to your mistake?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much that kind of camaraderie of, well, we'll get it again next time. Or in the case of performance, the crowd hasn't heard this before and they won't know. Like that,
See?
sort of thing. Yeah, it very much that sort of thing. And also the reality, we're all human and it will happen to the best of us no matter. And I was always fairly skilled. I won awards for music, all this type of thing. And I have still the same attitude of like, yeah, it will happen to everyone at some point. So you know, don't get too twisted about it.
Yeah, and as tough as my father was, high expectations in terms of education, but there is the allowance to make mistakes, and mistakes were encouraged in my household. We were not expected to be perfect. And again, on the sports field, if you hit 300 in baseball, you're an all-star, you're a Hall of Famer. So we very much understand that there's a very big importance to making those mistakes, and those were really preached and reinforced as I was growing up.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know if you felt this way. I grew up in a household that was the opposite. Perfection was the standard.
Hmm.
Um, Anything less was just simply unacceptable. Um, so I never felt that freedom to make mistakes. And this, obviously, as I got older and did more complicated things and all this type of thing, kind of became a little bit of a liability. Um, did you ever feel like that freedom to make a mistake, try again, all that type of thing? Did you ever feel that freedom, or did you not know because you were raised in a different environment?
I felt the freedom to make mistakes, especially in the sports venue, in sports venues. In terms of academics, I was a lot less accepting of mistakes. So one of my earliest memories as a kid is my mother ripping a page out of my notebook because I didn't write it neat enough. And I sat there with tears streaming down my face. And my mother said the tears aren't going to do anything. And it was a really good lesson. So in that regard, perfection was really important because my mother taught me that this needs to be done the right way. But if I brought home a test that was less than perfect, she didn't yell, didn't scream. I don't come from a family of yellers and screamers. But it was the expectation that you do your best the first time around. And if mistakes happen and you've done your best, that's absolutely fine. So we definitely grew up with that throughout the course of our lives. That was never a question. So it was the expectation to do your best, but not the expectation of perfection.
No, I mean, I think that's a much healthier way of being. I say this, when it comes to shipping product at a company, when it comes to books and all this type of thing, perfection is the enemy of good. One of
Mm-hmm.
the biggest pieces of writing I give out is I say, one, you cannot do anything until you have a draft, so please, dear God, write something. And then two is at some point you have to stop writing. I have a book right now that's beginning to reach that point of there are many, many more things I could say, but I've said all I needed to say. So I must stop writing now, and I've got to let it go out into the world. Um, and realize that it's not going to be perfect, but it's good enough, sort of thing. Um, but it took me a great many years to get to that place. I think that's why my first novel took so long. Is I had to get to a place where I could accept it not being perfect as such. Um, what in terms of your own life, how's that interplay between perfection and good enough played out as you've become older and had to confront new challenges like fatherhood, for example?
So with fatherhood, even holding the baby at this point is a struggle for me. I don't know how to hold the baby. I'm very stiff when I do things like this. So I accept the newness of things. When I get into something new, whether it's writing a book, whether it's being a father, I have come to a point in my life where I accept that I'm not going to be good at it immediately. And again, that's something that I struggled with for a very long time. Very similar to you in terms of being a writer. I wrote this piece in 2017, so 6 years ago, like I mentioned. And when I put the final word on the page, I thought I was going to win a Pulitzer Prize. Now, I'm thinking back to Ernest Hemingway in 1952, An Old Man and the Sea, and I'm thinking that's me right now in 2017. So I shelved it for a couple of weeks, and I went back and I read it, and it was horrible. It was maybe decent writing, but there was a total lack of story, and it was not a good book. And I'm glad I didn't release it. But these are the things that as you go, you learn, you figure out, as you said, you have to write something. If I'm not writing something, then I can't be a writer. I need that draft. So I think of my life and anything I do in my life as a draft. So whether I'm teaching a lesson in school, that's a draft. Some days it'll be good. There'll be other days where I really have to edit it a lot. Same thing with this book. This book took a while to write. I go back, I read it the first time. There are things I want to edit. So if I look at myself and anything that I do, including fatherhood, as a work in progress, I'm going to be okay. And that level of acceptance has helped me massively.
No, absolutely. And that is, I mean, but such a difficult lesson, but such a important one. Because if you don't, it holds you back from actually doing anything, which is worse,
100%.
obviously.
100%. Yeah,
Um,
like you said, good is the enemy, or perfect is the enemy of good, right?
yes, absolutely. Well, it's just a matter of you got to get yourself out there. You've got to do something. You've got to produce something. You've got to start, somewhere, sort of thing. Um,
But think
we
how
were
many people would be so much better if they actually started. We get this paralysis through all these fears we have when there's really no need to have them.
No, no, we were joking in pre-production. I've just moved house at the time of recording, and this recording looks a little bit odd. A little green right now, and I was talking about saying, well, I'll fix it. It's a work in progress, and I'll fix it. But a lot of people they would shut it off, and that would be it, and all this type of thing. Not me. I've done 200 episodes. We plow forward.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Exactly.
Yes, no, I mean, I remember in 2014 I started, and I was 26 years old. I was renting a room in a house in Tacoma, Washington. I had a little video camera, and that's how I started. And now we stream in 4K on multiple platforms. It's all very fancy.
That's it.
But I mean, you have to put yourself out there and do something. You have to put yourself out there and do something. Which leads me to lesson number 12. Persistence is more than a virtue, it's a lifeline. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. It goes back to what we are talking about. People will not do something, or they'll give up when they're doing it too easily. So we have a sort of an adopted brother in the family who's been with us since we were 15. And one of the things I've mentioned is that we were playing a game one time, and there was a ball that was hit, and it seemed like it wasn't going to be caught. And he got on his horse and he kept chasing and chasing. And I said, there's no way in hell he's going to catch this. Last second, he dove, he extended, and he caught the ball. And after the game, my father was talking to us, and he referenced that catch. 99% of other players, whether high school, college, or major league, would have probably given up on that. But Sky, he didn't. Right? He had that persistence. And I think that's what separates us. And I think that's what my father was trying to teach us, is that persistence to keep going when things look out of reach is what's going to separate us and make us accomplish things that we might not have thought possible in the first instance.
Well, and it's also so intrinsically human. We're the only persistence predator on the planet. We will chase something down over hill and dale. And that's why we're the dominant species on the planet. That's really it. People do not realize it's the fact that we don't keep to our own set territory and we're willing to chase the bear over hill and dale. That's like that topsoil and rain is the secret to human civilization. Exactly. It's
And somewhere along the line, we forget that, though. As humans, we also, even though we're the other dominant species, we seek comfort. It's inherent in us, especially now, like you mentioned, streaming in 4K, all the things that were difficult to do early on now come to us so easily. So we seek that comfort. And it's extending beyond that zone of comfort that really makes the difference and really makes you in terms of building character.
Cat alert, cat alert. This video will do much better now. I'm always encouraging. I have a friend who I do some business coaching with, and she's a bridal seamstress and does custom gowns and all this type of thing. And she worked in a big shop and then had her own spot in someone else's shop. And then we got her out on her own. And so I've been encouraging her, how to negotiate a deal, going out and networking. And a lot of these things are really hard for her to do. She was agoraphobic for 10 years. She literally didn't leave her house for a decade. And so when I'm kind of like, yeah, you need to go visit them and have a conversation with them and all this type of thing, it takes so much. But every single time she's like, oh my God, I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad I went. They're sending me new business, all this type of thing. And I'm kind of like, see, it wasn't so bad. You didn't die, So it's like, I'm always, and I think as like from a coaching perspective, I think that's the hardest part is getting people to step 2 inches outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah. But for me, that's the biggest reward. And that's one of the biggest feelings, one of the greatest feelings that I have. I know I don't drink, and I don't smoke. I don't do any of the things that might give me some other type of high. But when I'm doing these things that really challenge me, when I know that there's people still sleeping or that there's people who won't do this, that's where I get my high from.
No, absolutely. And I recently, her and I did a series together on fashion called Fashion Moves the World. And she was so nervous about, being on camera. And we did, it was hard. It was three 2-hour recording sessions. We had spent months doing research and preparation for it, all this type of thing. And I was kind of like, it's, when her and I used to do fashion shows together, I said, everything is fine until the first girl walks down the runway. This is the same thing. Everything is fine until we press record and we go for it. And that's just that's how it goes, and it'll be fine. And people loved it. The series just concluded in early October. And it was one of those things where we were both glad it was over because it was such a huge lift, but it was another one of those things where it's kind of like, yeah, you've put yourself out there, you've done something, and that can have deep personal meaning as well. Well, speaking of meaning, I don't know if you sense this in our modern society, but we have such a crisis of meaning and purpose and fulfillment, especially for young men. Where do you get meaning and purpose and fulfillment from? How do you navigate this new world as a man? Because this is such a hot topic right now. Like this is just everyone's talking about this, so we have to talk about it.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I'm not a person to seek happiness. So you mentioned meaning and purpose, and those are the 2 things that I'm after. So the way I find
I don't do happiness either. I was happy once for a half hour in like 2018.
No. I'm not big on the pursuit of the happiness. I'm big on finding meaning in my life, and my meaning comes through education, through teaching. And I think that's why this book was so, it felt natural for me to write. It was a reflection, and it was me passing on those reflections. So I find meaning in my teaching. And I think my purpose is, off of my teaching, is to give to others the best way I can. And I never intended to become a teacher. I've always liked writing, but teaching led me into my writing career. So
Mm.
as a teacher, I was only going to teach for 2 years in New York City. I was going to go and become a lawyer. I was going to become corporate law, like sort of an early version of Harvey Specter from Suits. That's what I thought my life was going to be. But
Mm.
every year I said, "Oh, this is my last year teaching. I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to make the big money." And I never did that. And I stayed teaching because that's where I feel the meaning, and that's where I feel like I am actually serving a purpose on a larger scale. And as I seek something more to contribute, that's where my writing comes in. So it seems that I was able to connect the dots now looking backwards. I wasn't able to do it when I was in my early 20s or my mid 20s. But now that I'm in my early 40s, dare I say, which is still tough to say, by the way. But as I get into my 40s, I realize, well, I am serving a purpose. I have great meaning in my life, and therefore I am happy every day. A smile doesn't leave my face because I have found that meaning and purpose. And what I would say to other people is what makes you smile? What gives you that meaning? What are you contributing? So it's not about me. I have my selfish aspects. I make sure I'm doing the right thing for myself. But ultimately, it's what can I contribute to the people around me?
No, that's very good. If there was any one single piece of advice you would give to someone from this book, what would it be?
A single piece of advice from the book, it would be there's a chapter called, or a lesson called, get in front of the ball.
Mm.
And that means you take things head on. You don't sidestep things. You don't put your head in the sand. You take things head on, easy, medium, or difficult. No matter what it is, you're going to take your bumps and bruises, but get in front of the ball, knock it down, and it's easier to make a play off of that.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. That was, I think, I was a very I'm autistic, so I have demand avoidance as kind of my natural default. And so when I was young, I was big on avoiding conflict and things that I didn't like and all this type of thing. And I think one of the things that changed my life in a weird way is I realized that I had to go at things head on. um and that was a big shift for me because it's not my natural inclination, was not my natural inclination, some days still isn't. um but it is something that has solved a lot of problems, avoided a lot of issues, um and been incredibly valuable in just the conversation of life and dealing with things and problems and whatever have you. Like, that's very good. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the things I love about this book is there are so many things in here that I even realized in the course of this conversation, things I realized that I decided, changes I made in my life that I didn't think about and didn't really write down at the time. And you have done such an excellent job of really kind of distilling that and putting that together in a way that's incredibly helpful.
Thank you for that, Cameron. I
Um,
appreciate it.
yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that. And I think the great thing about this book that's so cool is it offers so many great lessons of life, and it's not nearly as toxic as Jordan Peterson,
No,
or
no, no, no. And it's a
some of
lot
these
shorter
other
than his
people.
books.
Yes. I mean, yeah, it's just such a different mood and a different vibe. And I wish you to be as popular as he is.
I hope that your wish for me does come true, and I hope I could be on the show again after that wish is fulfilled.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've reached the part of the show where we do plugs. Now, here's what we do. Tell us where we can find you online and where we can buy the book.
Sure. So the book is on Amazon.com, both as Kindle and as a print version. And you can find me online at Greg Travis for Instagram. I think at Greg Vrecenak for Twitter, for X. It might be at Greg Travis as well. As you can tell, my social media game needs to be stepped up, Cameron.
Well, that's okay. We'll keep track of you on those platforms. And thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Cameron, thank you so much for having me.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.